Ethan Walsh thought moving to the mountains would bring him peace. He left everything behind: his old life, the city, the memories of war. The small, isolated town of Black Hollow seemed like the perfect place to start over. It wasn't much, just a cabin at the edge of a dense forest, the nearest neighbor miles away, and a job at the local hardware store that paid enough to get by. The townsfolk were polite, if distant, and they didn't pry into his past. That was exactly what he wanted. But you can't outrun what's inside your head. And soon, Ethan realized he wasn't as alone as he thought. At first, it was the dreams, scenes from the desert, the firefights, the faces of men he couldn't save. The screams echoed through his cabin late at night, jolting him awake, heart hammering in his chest. He told himself it was normal, part of adjusting. Everyone told him the nightmares would fade. But then came the noises, soft shuffling around the cabin in the dead of night. Faint whispers carried through the trees, the distant crunch of footsteps on fallen leaves that stopped when he held his breath. Ethan convinced himself it was just wildlife, or maybe just his mind playing tricks on him. But then he started seeing things. Walking home from the store late one evening, he caught a glimpse of movement between the trees, a shadow, low and shifting, moving just out of sight. He froze, his training kicking in, his pulse spiking. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice swallowed by the silence. Nothing. He forced himself to keep walking, but the feeling of eyes on his back never left. That night, he barricaded the door with furniture and sat on the floor, staring at the entrance with his pistol in his lap. The wind howled outside, and he swore he heard something breathing beyond the thin wooden walls. The days blurred into each other. Ethan stopped going into town as much. People started noticing the dark circles under his eyes, the way he flinched when a door slammed too hard, or the way he always seemed to be listening for something they couldn't hear. He stopped answering calls from his sister, who checked in every week to see if he was adjusting okay. He wasn't. The whispers at night turned into voices, voices that knew his name, voices that whispered things only he should know. One evening, Ethan found something outside his cabin, a footprint, not his, not human. He knelt, tracing the outline of it with shaking fingers, too large, too deep, with claw marks trailing into the woods. He stared into the trees, feeling them watching him back. Ethan retreated inside and didn't come out for days. The scribbling started soon after. At first, they were just notes, reminders. Lock the door, check the windows, don't sleep too deep. But soon, they became frantic, desperate, paranoid warnings scrawled in shaky handwriting. "They're watching. Don't look into the trees. It knows I'm here." He plastered the walls with them, covering every inch of wood in plaster, as if writing them down could keep the nightmares out. The town noticed his absence. The store manager sent someone to check on him after Ethan stopped showing up for work. The young delivery boy drove up to the cabin but didn't stay long. He came back pale, shaken, whispering about the walls covered in writing and the overwhelming stench of fear inside. But Ethan wasn't there. When the sheriff finally forced the door open, the inside of the cabin looked like a crime scene. Furniture overturned, holes in the walls where he'd driven knives into them. Scribblings in black ink and blood covered every surface. The words, "It's in the trees," were repeated over and over again across the walls, the ceilings, even the floors. And then they found him. Ethan was slumped in the corner, eyes wide, staring at something only he could see. His face frozen in terror, his body long gone cold. No sign of struggle, no wounds, just gone. The town buried him quietly, no family in attendance, no ceremony. The official report listed it as self-inflicted due to post-traumatic stress. Just another soldier who couldn't leave the war behind. But some of the locals weren't so sure. Hunters swore they'd seen shadows moving between the trees at night, flickers of something darting through the darkness where Ethan's cabin once stood. A few claimed they could still hear his whispers carried on the wind. The town moved on, but the forest never did. Sometimes a hiker would go missing, or a camper would swear they heard whispers that sounded like Ethan's voice. And if you walked deep enough into the woods where his cabin once stood, you might just find a single scrawled message barely visible on the bark of a tree. "It knows I'm here." But no one ever stayed long enough to find out what it was.